Defining Duke, an Xbox podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support the show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Salutations, everybody. It is Maddie here, and welcome to episode 50 of Defining Duke Ultimate, a Defining Duke supplement. Today, we have a very important conversation to have that we've definitely had in passing on multiple episodes of Defining Duke, as well as Sacred Symbols. We're talking about the silent pursuit of global gaming domination, as this article we're looking at so aptly put it, for Tencent, and some of the creative constrictions we've seen and some of the shifts around the games industry we've seen as more money enters it. So as always, I'm joined by my co-host for Defining Duke, Lord Cognito. Cog, how are you doing?
Maddie, what's going on? We got Cobra Commander here. I'm very excited. I love colors in the building, man. It's a great discussion. I'm very excited about this. A lot of ways to tackle it. I'm curious to hear everyone's viewpoint here. So yeah, this is a good one, man. Let's go.
And yes, as Cog put it, we got Colin with us today. Colin, you kind of were the driving force, I think, in this company for spreading some awareness on what's been going on. So I wanted to have you on for this conversation for sure. How are you doing?
Cool. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, as I told you, I'm trying to, well, I'm not trying, it's scheduled. In February, I'm going to do a Sacred Symbols Plus episode with a guy from a think tank called RAND, which is a huge think tank, I'm sure people know, who's like an expert in this stuff, where we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how this happened. And so I thought it would be cool to rather just with you guys, and I'm so glad to be invited. So thank you, to get into like what we think it means and how we take it. I think it's an incredibly political conversation, especially. So I think it'll be interesting to hear what everyone has to say.
Yeah. I figured let's just dive into the deep end, right? So obviously we want to put a Tencent in our line of our sites, rather, because they're definitely the primary expansion group, if you will. You know, they remind me a little bit of Embracer, where you just see them popping up everywhere. Most recently, we've seen them acquire Turtle Rock. We've seen them do a small investment in Remedy. They keep getting on the board of so many different game companies, and we've seen how that can affect things where, as Colin said, things can get political. You think of what occurred with Activision, Blitzchung, and you look at a situation like that and how quickly a company kind of backs off from maybe what would be considered ethically correct when money is on the table from certain companies. And so there's a lot of tendrils to this conversation. I just want to dish it to, let's start off with Cog. I want to dish it to you, Cog, and just check your pulse, check your temperature, check all that stuff on where you're at with the expansion of Tencent and the investment of Chinese money in so many game companies.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've discussed this at a lot of different topics on Defining Duke. When you talk about different studios and you hear about the investment of Tencent, you hear about, you know, the involvement of Tencent. So like we always say, the tendrils are expanding, and it's kind of interesting. It's pretty staggering to take a step back and look at it. If you just look at it visibly on a paper, right, and just see what they are actually involved with in all the major games and all the major studios. You have COD, you have Fortnite, you have, you know, Epic, the list goes on, Pokemon Unite. I mean, all these Roblox, PUBG. I mean, these are major franchises, and it's just interesting to kind of chart their journey, because it's kind of like a mobile only. They really kind of expanded through WeChat, this kind of like software distribution platform, and it's just staggering to see from the mobile standpoint, and then moving into console and then PC. So I've been definitely, you know, charting them, seeing what's going on. And I know I'll talk briefly, you know, about the moral dilemma it presents, right? If you're a studio and you know, they come knocking, you know, how do you deal with it, and the consequences and the potential pitfalls that could happen when engaging with them. So I think where I'm at right now is short and sweet. Not every bag is a good bag. And you need to be very cognizant of what you're dealing with, because, you know, we've seen examples of censorship and so on and so forth. So I got more to say, but that's my initial feeling right now. Very intrigued by monitoring, and this expansion does not seem to stop.
Colin, how about you? You know, I know you've been very vocal, so go on for however long you'd like on where you stand on the expansion of Chinese money in gaming.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, I think it's political. I think it needs to be said up front that I'm vehemently anti-communist. So that's a huge part of it. And I think probably many people in the West are vehemently anti-communist if they think carefully about it.
I'd say so.
But it means more now than it did, say, during the Cold War with the Soviets, because first of all, the Soviets were demonstrably weaker than us. I don't think that's true with the Chinese. And second of all, they were kind of like, normal, sitting at the table, afraid of us, and we're afraid of them, and the red phone and, the missile crisis and nothing ever came to a head. It's actually amazing. Like, we never had a hot anything with the Soviets because you felt like you were dealing with maybe normal people. And with the Chinese communists, they're many times more powerful. They have many times more people under their control. And with that, when you're dealing with a totalitarian dictatorship and a closed economy, your access to it comes with all sorts of check marks that you have to put on a piece of paper and control, and you can't say certain things. And I think there are some companies that have gone so overboard with their connection to China, like Disney, that I can barely even fathom supporting them at all. And that's like why I don't have Disney Plus. Look what they did to John Boyega on Star Wars posters, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to what I used to say about, well, not used to, but back when the Israel thing was blowing up earlier last year, and Israel and Palestine, or what's going on with China and all of this. It's so conflicting because the very people who want to get in bed with you are the very people who would eradicate you from this fucking planet if they could. And it's this weird tension in my mind between, like, Don't Nod is a good example, right? You look at the studio as being a studio of storytelling, clearly very liberal studio. They care about trans people, they care about gay people, they care about all these things, but they took Tencent's money. Go try to be trans in China and see what happens to you.
That's real.
And
very good point.
So beyond the economic principle of, like, I think one of the great American errors of the last 50 years was normalizing trade with China. It seemed like a good idea to bring them into the World Trade Organization. They can trade with USD. They have no more barriers anymore, but it has emboldened them because they are basically a capitalistic society, soft capitalistic society with a totalitarian dictatorship at the top. And as long as everyone's doing well there, they won't fight back. And it gets bigger and bigger and more bloated. And Tencent is a dangerous company because Tencent is a known tendril of the Communist Party. It's not like, I'm sorry, I'm going on, but let me use this as an example.
Please. Like I said at the start, keep going.
You remember when, well, you guys might not remember, but there was a nightclub that was shot up in California a few years ago. And the FBI went to Apple and they were like, we have the terrorist phone. We need you to break it open. And Apple's like, we're not doing that.
Yes,
I remember that very clearly.
And they're like, what are you kidding? Like, this guy killed like 20 people. And they're like, we're not doing that. We don't do that. And that's not a choice in China. If the government comes to you and says, like, we want access to this, we want access to that, it's like, you're going to do it or they're going to remove you from that. And some companies like Yahoo recently said, we can't even tolerate doing business here anymore, and they left. So I'm going on and on just to say that nothing comes without cost. And I think Cog touched on this too. We all live in this hypocritical situation with a global market and all the tension that comes with it. The question is where we can make decisions to make things better, or to take the ease, to ease the situation in such a way, like Sony doesn't give us a chance, or Microsoft, to buy an Xbox or a PlayStation that wasn't made in China. It's not happening. If they were to say, here's $800 for a PS5 made in the United States, some people might make that choice, but they don't give you that option. And I understand why they don't, because it's just not practical. But it's important for us to look at places where we can have choice, like with our interaction with Tencent, and say, hey, can we make a different sort of decision, knowing that 25% of the company's workforce are members, card-carrying members of the Communist Party, while less than 10% of Chinese population is card-carrying, meaning that Tencent is 2.5 times more communist than the average per capita Chinese person, who's probably not a member of the Chinese Communist Organization. So there's a lot going into it, and they're spreading their money around because they want power, and they also want to get out. They're afraid. Tencent is kind of has its own tension with its government too. So
Beijing.
I don't know. I'm going on and on. There's a lot here because I'm having all my notes here, but it's just, it's so complicated. And here's what I think is that it's much more nefarious and sinister than people realize. And as long as we can have that conversation, then I think maybe people can do business with their eyes wide open and understand that it's not just Tencent, it's other companies too, like SNK and the Saudi government and all the sorts of weird shit that's happening where it's like, this isn't good. They live by different values than us. And I'll just say this to close is no one is better than any other person, depending on where they're born. Person born in Djibouti or a person born in, Oman or a person born in Japan, whatever. But certain societies are certainly superior to other societies, and their values are certainly superior to other societies' values. And I'll take our values any day of the week over what goes on in some of these other places around the world. And we have to have eyes wide open in the 21st century, that we can't just keep our eyes closed to the human rights abuses and to the flagrant mischaracterization of what is going on in certain places and how disastrous our business is to sustaining that status quo in China as well.
Very well said. And I think that beautifully lays out the many, many tendrils that go into just buying and supporting one of these games. And what I kind of wanted to set up here was effectively what's happening is a bit of a video game landmine process here. You start to walk around and see like, oh, that there's investment there, there's investment there. Like, do we not support Remedy anymore? Do we not support Turtle Rock anymore? You look at one of the very biggest games of last year, which was Genshin Impact. I mean, this is a huge AAA Breath of the Wild anime RPG. It checks all these boxes that people are looking for. That's exploding. They're under that umbrella with Tencent. You start to realize in just how many places this company is, and it starts to become unavoidable. So again, just to keep kicking it back to you guys, what is COG to you? What is the general counter to that? Do you not play these games? Do you spend selectively when investing in these games? Do you not spend at all and just play? Like, could you play Genshin Impact for free and just enjoy from a distance and not give them your money? How do you navigate this video game landmine? Because I feel like what's happening, and the reason I wanted to have this conversation is I think it's just getting increasingly difficult.
Yeah. And it's a great question, Maddie. And I think what it is this is where the moral conundrum starts, right? This is where, in my opinion, right, there are personal moral choices you have to make and whether or not you are going to choose to support something. And I'll give you an example. It's like, for example, Splash Damage, which I really like. They make one of my favorite games as far as they actually help on a support studio with a coalition for Gears Tactics, which I'm a huge fan of, right? Yes. Support those guys, have some relationships with them. And recently, they got acquired, right? And I saw how polarizing it was in the building. You see, in one hand, you have people you've had this relationship with, and now people are saying, hey, I can't support that. And I can't be mad at that, right? I can't be mad at saying, oh, I don't want anything to do with you because now you have that. But on the other hand, there's a group that says, well, you know what? Management made this decision. Should I penalize all the people underneath who didn't have a play in the decision? And I still want to support those guys in their livelihoods, right? And I'll personalize it for me, and not that it's related to Tencent, but in the sense of, okay, look, I'm with Oculus /Meta, right? Mm-hmm. I know people that come up to me and say, COG, I'll support you. I love your journey. I love what you're doing. I love the tech. I love what VR is doing, but there is no way in hell I am supporting Facebook. And I got to respect it, right? I got to respect it. Like morally, they'll be like, hey, until that account is removed or whatever, I don't want any dealings with it. So I don't necessarily think there's a right. It's a personal choice. You have to decide for yourself how you are going to navigate this, because there are the personal aspect as far as the relationship with you or in either the developer or you in the game and the emotionality with that. And I don't really think there's a wrong answer to each of them. I'm just going to be honest, because the reason why I say that is because I do feel that if you want to support the dev, right? And like I said, management make that decision. I can't get mad at you that you're still playing League of Legends. That's just me personally, right? But I can respect the person that says, yo, I ain't got nothing to deal with it. So it's a tough one, man. It's really polarizing, but I'm very curious to see how both of you are navigating that, especially, with games you may love prior to a Tencent acquisition. Like do you go cold turkey now?
Yeah,
Like, how does that work for you?
Because, what I've noticed that's happening is they're kind of like calculated assassin in a way. They've targeted the artiste as of late, right? I do think of Remedy. I think of Platinum Games. Platinum Games I can speak to more personally because Platinum Games is a company that I love. Like, I think they make some of the best action games in the industry. And it's a tough pill to swallow to imagine, like, oh, do I want to support them because of like where the money's coming from? Is it going to the right place? Like, that's a big part of buying things. Like, I always have had a value of like trying to support local businesses before going online anywhere. Like, I always want to make sure my money's going to the right spot to good people, good businesses. And it's like, do I love a Platinum game enough to accept that reality, that business reality, that they make kind of eccentric games, they make very weird action games that aren't very marketable. And for me to keep getting those as a consumer, I just need to swallow that pill. That's the issue I've personally had. And Colin, you brought up Disney Plus. Like, I was just watching Book of Boba Fett last night, not even thinking twice about it, right? Like, I'm a diehard Star Wars fan. I really enjoy Marvel. So like, to me, that's like a subscription without question. But you start to look at, as you said perfectly, like the John Boyega poster, it's like, do we really support that type of shit where it's gotten that bad? So I want to kick it over to you now, Colin, with the video game landmine and how you've found yourself navigating this.
Yeah, I as far as Disney is concerned, I just bring them up because I think that they are so egregious. They don't care. And I think that they're not even trying to be cute about it, where it's like, oh, what a mistake. Like, they're just it's like the NBA. It's the same thing. I lost so much respect for the NBA over the last few years where I'm just like, I'm done with this league, which is unfortunate.
I didn't like it anyway, so.
Yeah, I love basketball, but it's a great game. But the NBA is just so, I'm like, oh, it's so fucked. What are you doing? It started with the GM of the Rockets a few years ago and all that. So to me, I identify these certain companies where I'm like, just no, I can avoid doing business with you for the most part. But I think what the important thing is, in my own estimation, and what I say on Sacred all the time, is like, we can all just make decisions that ameliorate the situation just a little bit. Like, you don't have to, it's like dieting. The best way to diet is to make a new sustainable normal, not to just cut yourself off from things. And so I look at things and I say, well, I probably won't be able to avoid this, but I can avoid this. With our own company, we do American made merch because we know we can make that choice. We can make the choice to such a degree that I can make the choice for you to say, like, there is no Last Stand merch that is Chinese. Like, you're not going to be able to buy Chinese Last Stand merch. Now you can go and take our logo and put it on a Chinese shirt yourself. That's your choice, and we allow that. But it's like, I made a choice, and then I went one level down and I made another choice that will make you guys out there make a different choice, hopefully. And we can kind of, I think, begin to affect change that way. But the reality is that we're all going to live this hypocritical life. And
yes, that's what I feel.
And I feel like it's so funny, Kyle, because when I look at it reminds me a lot of Bethesda with Microsoft, where when Microsoft bought Bethesda, I personally, as a gamer, dodged a bullet because I don't really care about very many of those games. Like id and Machine Games, I'm going to miss. But otherwise, I'm like, And it feels like with Tencent, I've kind of been dancing the same way, where I look at it, I'm like, Don't Nod. I don't care about Don't Nod or Bloober. Marvelous is kind of tough for me because they own Spike Chunsoft, which I really like. But you look at Paradox, and they own a very small percentage of Remedy. They own a bunch of Supercell. I mean, I'm never going to play a Supercell game. But then something like Turtle Rock hits, and I'm not a Turtle Rock fan, but it hits, and you're like, now it's landing. Like, you can tell the rockets are starting to get like closer and closer. And I wonder when I'm going to wake up one day and they're going to have a piece of something I care about. And right now they just simply don't. I think the closest thing that they do have that I care about is a substantial piece of Epic. And the only reason I care about that is because Unreal Engine 5 is the central theme of many a AAA current gen exclusive. We're not going to be able to avoid it. And then you see those tendrils dipping into like, well, Days Gone runs on Unreal Engine 4, right? So now Sony is giving 5% rips to them. Now you're getting involved in all of it. So you're right. Like, once the tendrils start sneaking out, it's going to be unavoidable at some point. And the only way, I feel very lucky. I almost like dodge anything that would make me make an immediate choice. But the companies that I really love have been unaffected for now. But it is hitting close to home too, because Sony is doing business with Epic. Sony is doing business with Discord. Sony is doing business with all these things that are now going to be at the same table with Chinese interests. And the reason that I'm skeptical about what Tencent is doing, because people out there that are in politics might know this thing called the Belt and Road Initiative, which is something that China does. They've been doing it for about 10 years, and they're going to continue to do it, which is what basically they go into countries India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, East African countries, whatever. And they say like, oh, you want a new harbor? We'll build it. You'll owe us the money. You'll default on it. Then we're going to own the harbor. And they've been doing this all over the place. And I feel like there's some piece of them getting involved, like, oh, we own 3% of Remedy. Don't worry about us. But what happens in a few years if Remedy's like, we need money? And they look around the board and they're like, oh, you need money? Well, we have money. And that's what they're doing in politics. That's what they're doing in geopolitics. And when you have a company that is in gradient with a political party like they are, you can't help but see the strategies as exactly identical. I am telling you, they are seeding themselves to these companies to take them over. And whether they might get only 1 or 2 successes, but it's going to be a pretty big success if they say, oh yeah, we knocked over Don't Nod. We knocked over enough of Epic to have 50, maybe they, although a majority of Epic is in one person's hands, maybe they rework it so they have a majority share. This is also happening with the Saudi royal family with companies like SNK. So it's not good. And I just want to remind people, China is a totalitarian dictatorship. They will disappear you if you do something wrong. They have concentration camps. They have work camps, forced labor camps full of Muslims and other, especially in the northwest of China, social, cultural, political minorities. They're not good at a systemic level, and you should be very skeptical of everything they do from that lens. And as long as we're okay with understanding, like, yeah, we have this kind of weird tension with them, I think we can work around it. But it's like when you recycle or you get a car that has better miles per gallon, like you're making choices that better things, but you're not solving the problem. If we could all just make a little bit of a move towards solving that problem by just saying no maybe every 5 times or something like that, then it'll hit them where it hurts the most. And so I worry about this Belt and Road Initiative thing they do in politics with real money, because it just feels like their companies are doing the same thing.
Well, yeah, I just want. Oh, sorry, go on, Gog, please.
No, I'm just going to add one quick point as Colin's on fire with that. I think the other thing I think is interesting is when we're talking about that, and then you're talking about what's actually going on in China, when we're talking about with Beijing and the stipulations and stuff that's going on there with regulation of video game time and online verification. To me, that's also something that I want to be cognizant of, because that may now accelerate international growth outside, right? For not to focus on that. So that's another factor here that I'm like, wow, this really gives them more incentive to be investing in video game companies and stuff that are outside of the region because of the potential stipulations they have, quote unquote, at home, right? And that, I mean, their stock falls down kind of immediately when kids are only allowed to play 3 hours a game or so on and so forth. So it's very interesting to monitor. I'll give it back to you, Matt. I just wanted to add that point.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah, no, I just think Colin kind of refortified something I had said earlier, which is, again, I think you're going to see them maybe not go after the big dogs. Like, they're not going to suddenly just try to take over EA. I think you're going to maybe see them go for the cuter companies, the ones that are diehard artists that are trying to make something creative. Because, Colin, you and I can speak to this to some extent. Like, we're both investing in making video games. Like, we know some of the financial risks that come with that. Like, it's not as simple as like, do this, do that, this happens. Like, sometimes things change, you change scope constantly. And if you can have someone sort of in your back pocket effectively going like, I got you, like pat you in the back, like, I got money if you fuck up, like, it's okay.
Here you go.
Yeah, it's like, no, go try that out. Like, we got you. It's like, okay, let's go be creatives. Let's go figure it out. Like, Colin, you and I can speak firsthand. Like, there's a reassurance that you can imagine is there. I don't have that. So it's like, you got to be really calculated. But I think that's why you and I are also a little stingent on the dangers of bringing them to the table, because you know how tempting it can be, right? You can imagine the temptation of just knowing that money's there and how safe you can be with your experiments. It's like, well, we're just creatives, right? That's what you hear. Like, it lets us make the things we want. It's harmless, as Colin said, 3%, whatever. But what happens when they want to do something bigger and more experimental?
Yeah, they're going after, I mean, they're not going after anyone. Everyone's voluntarily going into these deals, but they're all, with the exception of a couple, these are all privately held companies. And very easy, theoretically, to go in and you don't have to hostily take them over. Remember, Vivendi tried for many years to take Ubisoft over hostily by doing it on the market.
That was a big one, yeah.
And they did it the hard way and it failed. They don't have to do that here. And so they can just get controlling interests, or they can vest. Like, the royal family of Saudi Arabia is vesting money into SNK through something called the Fisk Foundation, which is something supported by like Bill Gates and all these things. But they're eventually going to own 50% plus one shares of SNK, giving them controlling interest in everything they've ever done. And these things happen slowly and they're worked in the language. So they kind of happen silently. And before you know it, you look and you say, oh, I'm buying King of Fighters. And it's going to these stupid fucking dudes now. It's these guys that disappeared a journalist in front of everyone and got away with it in, Khashoggi. This is these are serious people you're dealing with. That's the other thing too. It just seems almost asymmetric. Like it seems so sinister for something like our sphere, but it's our sphere that has all the money, and that's why they're interested in it. And there's no doubt that there is a real need, as Cog said, for them to get out of China. But isn't it really weird that a Chinese-run organ is being told to work outside of the borders because they don't want to hurt their own people with their own products? That doesn't happen in the United States. No offense, we don't even have enough of an export economy at this point to even be able to say something like that. They thrive off of this, and it's just, I just want people to keep a close eye on it. And you can't put too fine a point on it, but you will wake up one day and these guys will have bought something that you care about. And you don't, mergers and acquisitions are just happening at a quicker and quicker and quicker clip. And I can't even, to the point where I don't even know what some of these companies even get anymore out of some of these acquisitions.
Yeah.
And so it's tough.
Yeah, we just saw Take-Two purchase Zynga for, what was that, 13 billion? I want to say,
which is unbelievable. They were dead at one point. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like Zynga was right down the road from IGN in the old Sega building in San Francisco. They were alive, then they were dead. Now they're worth more than ever. It just something doesn't compute here with a lot of this stuff. And you're right, because you make a good point too about the cost of games, but it's just so hard for me to imagine you're at Sumo Digital or you're at Katakawa or something and you're like, yeah, we'll take Chinese money, like, and not knowing what that comes with and having to kind of put your tail between your legs. And how can you get around that? How can you talk to your audience about that? How can you be earnest about the cost of doing business like that? And it's strange to me that companies will put themselves in that situation just for the safety of money. And there's plenty of money in the West. I consult with companies. They have plenty of money in the West. I guarantee you there are plenty of Western companies that want to buy things too.
I look at the situation with GOG. This is not really Tencent related, but there was this game called Devotion that had a joke about the Chinese president. And I remember seeing that, and GOG sort of rose up as this savior of Devotion. Like, we're the big storefront that'll take it on. And someone caught wind of it, because this was a buried story in a lot of ways, because this was right when Cyberpunk had come out. You were seeing the videos of it being broken. But this game had appeared on GOG after being taken down by multiple storefronts. And GOG takes it down and effectively says like, we received a lot of complaints from the audience, and therefore we have now removed it from the storefront. And it's like that type of, I don't know about everyone listening, but to me, like, that could be one of the more concerning factors, is like the blatant, we're going to lie to you, we're going to blame it on you because these people got us by the balls that badly.
Right. Yeah. And again, the moral choice as a studio, right? And, Maddie, me and you've talked about this a lot, where it's just like, I'm extremely pro developer. And one thing I always feel passionate about is artistic expression as a studio, right? And being able to create what you want, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. Right. I feel you should have the right, and then you have to deal with the consequences that be. But again, if you align yourself with an entity like this, we've seen the examples of the censorship. We've seen the examples of things removed from games. And that's where I struggle, because it's like, I don't want a voice to be muffled. So again, not every bag is a good bag. You have to know what you're dealing with. And I guess my question is, the decision, as Colin put it, as far as like, there's money out there, but like, the decision, like, how much of an financial peril are you that you make that decision, right? That what's the thought process, because what potentially could come with it. And the thing is, we see more and more. So is it just greed? Is it just an abundance of riches that people are just, they Remedy, cannot turn down? Because if you align yourself with Tencent, these are the things that can happen here. It's just a very curious thing to me. It's just the growth keeps going, and silently.
Right.
Silently, that's the thing.
Well,
right?
that's what I was going to say, Cog, was I thought something pretty interesting happened right before the VGAs, if you guys recall, or whatever they're calling it now. Like a week before, Tencent announced quietly that they created a new label called Level Infinite. And a bunch of their new purchases are happening under this. And this is giving them one-step removal.
Advertised all over the show.
Advertised.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So when you see that over and over again after trailers, it's like, that's Tencent. Yes. That's Tencent. Tencent. Every time you see one of those, it's just a label. And the other thing, because you had brought up, and you guys are right about this worry of censorship, let's not also overlook the preemptive censorship, as we're saying. We saw this with Arc System Works a couple of months ago. Arc System Works has no Chinese money invested in them. And they went to Guilty Gear, the newest Guilty Gear game, and took out Taiwan and took out all sorts of stuff, but Tibet. And it's like, because they're afraid that when the time comes, they're not going to get a fair shake in the Chinese market. It is more important to them to kowtow fictional politics and be like, oh yeah, your version of events is totally real. It's like in North Korea. In North Korea, they're taught that the North Koreans were invaded by the United States. That's not true. That didn't happen. The North invaded the South. But when you control all of the information, you don't know any better, and you can create new realities. And the money and the kowtowing reinforces their ability to do that. Remember, China has a totally separate internet. You can't even be on Twitter in China. It's illegal.
Right, correct.
So it's concerning from that level too, about what you're holding back, not only what you're doing actively, but what you're saying you won't put in a game, what you won't dare do. Will you not have a black protagonist in your game because you know that there's an incredible amount of racism in Chinese society?
Talk about it.
You know? Like that's going to be a relevant thing. If you want to sell to 1.2 billion people, you might want to think about that. And that's why we're the exact opposite. At Lilymo, my game studio, we're on the same page. We're going to be burying things in our games that are anti-communist, anti-China, anti, all of this stuff. And it's just going to be there. And our games will never be for sale in China by design. Good. You got to put a stake in the ground. I would love one of these publishers to say, we don't want to do business there. How cool would it be if Take-Two or EA or UB was like, we're just not doing it. We don't want your money. But no one is willing to do it. Just like the NBA wasn't willing to do it. Just like Disney.
Why everybody bending the knee though? That's my question. Like, I don't know.
Does someone not want to break the ice is the question, I guess.
It's also, I think that they realized that this is why normalizing trade with them was a mistake, because everything is, and this was decades ago, so it's too late, but you make an editorial decision like that, and they're going to be like, your games are manufactured here. The chips you need, they might be late, and we might lose that shipment of discs you need. I think that all of these guys are just like, it's the same thing with the NBA. It's not only, and this is an important part of it, even though it doesn't really resonate with me. The NBA is not like, we want to play basketball in China. We want to expose basketball. Obviously that's a part of it, but a big part of it too is like, we make everything here. The basketballs are made here. The clothes and the jerseys are made here. Like, we can't, this is what happens when you get intertwined, and that kind of stuff doesn't happen here in the United States. The United States doesn't do that. Apple refusing to work with the United States government didn't cost it a goddamn thing. And that was that is the point. It didn't cost them anything. All it did was gain a ton of respect for a lot of people to be like, they won't even crack open a terrorist's phone because they don't want any sort of premise in which they're like, you did it once. You helped us once. Yeah, to set the bad precedent. So I feel like there's so many levels, and it's funny, Maddie, that I think that Level Infinite thing snuck by a lot of people, which is why we talked about it.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah,
I watched Shaker Kakalas in it.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. We brought it up on the show because I want people to just be like, look at this. There was like how much money. And by the way, Jeff Keighley, no offense, I like Jeff Keighley. He seems like a nice guy, but how much money did he take from his company? And now it's, I don't know. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. At some point, I'm sorry.
Well, it paints a picture of sort of maybe Tencent's self-awareness, right? And their awareness of how they grow and how intrusive they can appear, that creating this new label. I mean, I would consider myself an enthusiast. I consider myself heavily invested. This went right by me. So who else can we go by?
Right.
It's that standard, but it's sneaky, right? And it's like, they know. So put another name on it, because imagine how disastrous it would have been if if it was the Tencent we all are familiar with after every trailer. It's like, dude, Tencent with Level Infinite. It's like, oh, this is just a new company. You didn't know.
Right. And Jeff gives it gravitas. He's like, oh yeah, I'll work with Level Infinite. And then so there you go. It's in the ether now. And Jeff didn't make the choice, right? He can make any choice he wants, but he could have made the choice to say, like, we're going to not do that. And that would have been one decision that might have made things better. And that's the entire point. It's like, we cured the ozone layer hole decades ago by like making collective decisions about aerosols and this slow healing and all of this kind of stuff. And it happened. It worked. I sometimes wonder if it's too late though. And I think the problem is that we are 1/4 their population. Not that that really matters, but the odds are evening with the middle class in China, where they're going to start looking inward and be like, we don't really need to do business with Americans anymore. We might find ourselves the one isolated from a global market that is much more reliant on them. And we saw that even with COVID, with fucking all the shit that's built there. We couldn't even make our own anything. We couldn't make our own masks. Nonetheless, video games. So it's gonna be it's so interesting. And I don't want us to become a vassal state to some foreign economy that can control what we say, do, think, and believe.
True.
And it's a very Minority Report almost, with future crimes and stuff like that, where you can't even say or think things. Like I couldn't, if I wanted to make a game about China, that wouldn't happen. You can't even go to China without a visa, first of all. And it's just different. I just want people to keep their eyes open and understand that we really should be pushing for change in this regard. And unfortunately, the change is probably going to have to come from inside of China. But I fear that this is going to hit, the rubber is going to hit the road if and when they go into Taiwan, which seems likely, I think, in the next few years. And people are really going to have to make massive decisions about, just like it's much easier with Russia as they annex Ukraine. We don't do anything with Russia. We don't have to make any decisions. We've put ourselves in a more difficult position here.
Question for both of you real quick. I know we talk about how massive they are, but yet the silent, almost covert nature. And then my question, I guess, for you is, like, we obviously we hear of the media influence and the media tendrils. Do you think that may also be playing into it as to why there's not really a strong pushback in a resistance to it, and why it's continuing to operate with the United States specifically, with us specifically?
I feel like I've become a big, I wouldn't say believer would be the right word, but I've taken note that a lot of people are almost very ignorance is bliss as times have gotten more hard for everyone. Like, I feel like COVID kind of gathered everyone into this big group and said, like, we're all suffering from the same BS, right? Normally you see people silently suffering with anxiety, depression, yada, yada. But this was something we could all collectively sympathize over together. And so everyone was taking like every victory they could, right? And I feel like this is one of those things where, since it's a slow glacial takeover, if you will, that, oh, if it doesn't affect me, then whatever.
Right,
it's not investing, it's not invading my life. Oh, what, Chinese money in Star Wars? Star Wars is still Star Wars, though. Who cares? It's like, I think as long as people's immediate lives are no longer disrupted, they don't care. It's something I've seen over the years. They don't care if it has not shifted their world. That's why, as Colin said, I don't think a lot of the audience will respond until they wake up and it's like, oh, hey, Bethesda, just a weird hypothetical, has been extracted from Microsoft by a lump sum of cash and is now a part of Tencent. Or, hey, we have now absorbed all of EA. So now all of the Star Wars games and all the Need for Speeds and all the sports games are now under the Tencent brand. Like, I think until it really, I think it's going to take something kind of, I don't want to sound very gloom and doom. I do genuinely think it's going to take something significant, like a huge purchase, to shake people awake and go like, oh, this has rattled my world a little bit. And then you start to see the other tendrils and go like, oh my God, it's there. It's everywhere. Okay.
It was too late, bro.
Yeah. I don't want it to get to that. That's why we're having this conversation. We don't want it to get late.
Yeah. It's going to pull everyone in one by one, and then they'll have to decide if they care or not. I mean, it's just, the reality is that I think that I've understood is that a lot of people just won't care regardless. And I think it can be made, they can point and say, like, you buy all this stuff on Amazon and you do all this and you go to Walmart and stuff. And that's why I'm saying I never try to pretend that I'm living this virtuous, autarky life in the United States where I buy only American products and there's no Chinese anything in my house. It's
I'm an Amazon customer. Yep.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not really possible. But I feel like a big answer to your question, Cog, is that I feel like there's nothing to gain or lose right now in our sphere, from speaking out about this, because I think it's mostly complicated. I think you saw that, and again, not to bring it up, but you saw it boil to a head in our industry with Israel and Palestine last year, because people kind of stepped into a situation they didn't really know very much about, a lot of these people, that had nothing to do with gaming. That's what's the bigger surprise, is that this actually has a great deal to do with the ability to tell stories and have experiences that are to your very desire, whatever that might be, which you're allowed to make here and you're not allowed to make there, and you're allowed to sell here and you're not allowed to sell there. And so I just, to me, if I were to look at this situation holistically, I would imagine that this is going to get worse. Yeah. And the only thing I think we can root for is not a lack of mergers and acquisitions, but that the acquisitions happen with parties that are better than the parties that are currently gobbling everything up. I've said over and over again, I don't want Sony or Microsoft to buy anyone. And I thought Microsoft buying Bethesda sucked just because it took those games away from other people. But I'd much rather everyone get under Microsoft's umbrella at this point.
Right. Than that.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, fine.
Yeah.
Fine. You know, like, or go. The other thing that I think is acting as a buttress societally is that there's still generational beef with Japan and China. And that's, while there is investment in stuff like Marvelous and Kadokawa, I think the likes of Square Enix, Capcom, Sega, I don't think any of these guys are going to do business like that, you know, and to the point where they're going to sell. And so maybe there'll be a little bit of a firewall there that will allow the Western companies to get themselves sorted out. But I think right now the moment is ripe to be independent, and the money's there, and force players to put their money where their mouth is. I think maybe companies should be more forthcoming, like we are, to say, like, we don't want to do business there. We don't want to give the money. Help us help you, and we'll help you help us at the same time. So we'll see. These uneven economies, though, make it impossible. You can't make an iPhone here for $1. You know, and that's again part of the ethics of it. Is it even ethical to be doing business with these companies when they treat their people so poorly, apart from all of the political crime and shit like that? So maybe it's almost too deep to even fathom, and it's also not exclusive to games.
Yeah. I mean, it's become sort of an eye for an eye, right? It's like, okay, so you brought up Square Enix, Sega, their potential resistance of this, but now we've just seen both of them come out with like this idea of, they call it pay to earn, right? With the NFTs and all this stuff. And it's like, do we want that instead? Do we want these service games? I'm not saying that's what you want, but I'm just saying, like, you know, you take a look at stuff like that. It's like, well, is this the trade-off? If we don't take that money, do they disrupt what video games are in general? Which is like the creative expressions that they are. Yeah. I just, that's why sometimes I'm like, are we too late? You know, in a number of ways, because the alternatives, the pivot points suck, I think, almost as much on at least a gaming level, maybe not ethically, of course, but that was immediately my thought when you brought that up, is like, well, are we going to take pay to earn games? Like, how do you feel about the pivot points?
Oh, bro, when you're talking about it, I remember that conversation we had on Duke. All I think about is my beloved Mass Effect.
Yeah.
Player choice, same-sex relations, you know, all these infinite possibilities that even developers knew. They wrote so many things in at the time that even maybe a small percentage of the actual gaming community would see. And that would not exist underneath it. Like that style of game would not. That's one of my favorite games, bro. Like, so again, it's just it's really concerning. It's really frustrating, because it bothers my soul when developer creativity is just silenced in any way. And that's where we at. I love games too much. So that's why it is personal to me. That's why it does mean something to me. And it's something that I respect, that, you know, we are talking about, because it needs to be brought up. It's almost like you said, Betty, like, is it a situation where the infiltration is just too late? They in the building. You know what I'm saying? It's like, damn, like, have we been, you know what I mean? Like, is it that late? That's the scary part. And I'm glad we are having this discussion, because a lot of people, you know, and even in the past, I've been guilty. But then when you look at it, and you just look at it on a document, this is what they own, this is what they're involved in, it's scary. It's staggering.
Yeah, it's it reminds me of also when we had talked about Activision a little bit, which I know is a completely different scenario. But the question that arose from a lot of the Defining Duke audience was, can I buy these games still? Like,
Right.
I'm interested in Diablo 2. I'm interested in Overwatch 2, but I don't like what I've read about these companies. Like, is it okay if I still buy or play these games? And I think it just comes down to a selection at times now, because it's, as Cog said perfectly, they're already in the building, right? So it's like, what do you buy? I guess and how selective do you have to be? Because again, it's that sneak up that they've done. Like, I think a Spike Chunsoft is one. It's like, oh, they got Marvelous. Okay. And then you see like how they connect and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so now it affects Danganronpa, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
that,
Danganronpa is like one of my favorite series. It's
Yeah.
like I've replayed all of them multiple times. Like, do I just not get the new one whenever they do that? If they ever do that, it's like, I don't know if I could say no to that. So you just got to pick and choose.
I was going to say, I think if we could be positive, or I could be positive, I think not to give it to Sony, because Sony does business in China. They sell the PlayStation 5 in China, or the PlayStation 4 in China. I don't think PS5 is there yet. But they are trying to extract games from China for PlayStation, for a global audience that should be untethered to any of these entities. And people can look it up. It's called the China Hero Project. I think there were 10 games identified that China was doing, that they were trying to get out of China. And a couple of them people would know, like that game Fist that came out a few months ago, FIST, the Metroidvania, that's Chinese. And that came out through that system or that fund. And Anno Mutatum, or whatever that game is called, that came out, that like it's a roguelike.
Oh yeah, no, Anno, yeah.
Yeah, that's Chinese. So that's what I want to reiterate from what I was saying earlier. It's not about Chinese people, of course.
Of course,
and we all know that, but
correct.
That's
Glad
kind
you
of
said it though. Yeah.
That's kind of the shame.
It's gotta be said.
That's kind of the shame, though, right? They make great games there too. They also don't want to live under the yoke of this shit either. They're afraid and scared. Remember in Tiananmen, they tried. I mean, that was the last time we ever saw anything like that in the late 80s. So I want to say, like, maybe another way we can support them is to try to get these games that are extracted to play them and show some love to those games as well, if you're interested in them. Because not everyone wants to be under. I would assume most people outside of the imperial capitals and shit don't want to have anything to do with this. Very similar to North Korea with Pyongyang. You leave that city, and I don't think anyone wants anything to do with North Korean politics. It's probably the same there too. So I hope that somewhere in that ether, we can have that inner societal and that communication that we had with the late Soviet Union when we started getting Soviet games. Of course, most famously Tetris, right? Maybe we can start getting stuff like that too, and we can start to connect in ways that we didn't think possible to at least circumvent the powers that be and communicate with each other as gamers, players, developers. But unfortunately, it's just going to be very difficult because we're, like I said, we're basically on separate internets, nonetheless, all of that other stuff. So, but that I wanted to be positive. PlayStation does so many things wrong. I thought that was one of the cool things that they did do.
I obviously we can keep talking as long as we need to, but I had definitely one final topic I wanted to hit on, and we did lightly touch on it, but obviously we've seen with this expansion over time that mergers and acquisitions are picking up. Do you see this really accelerating the process? Cog, you and I have talked a number of times on what we call like the defensive acquisition, where normally we pit the conversation like PlayStation is a very fighter-centric platform, right? They own Evo now. I could totally see them gobbling up NetherRealm because that just really makes sense for them. But does Xbox go in and just pluck NetherRealm off the market just to make sure that like they have a fighter? Because they don't have Killer Instinct right now. They say they want to do something with that, but Xbox honestly says they want to do a lot of things. But we don't look at it from the perspective of Tencent, who's creeping in, making all of these investments, these stakes. And do you see these other companies surrounding the industry picking things up and speeding up their acquisition process where they can with certain companies and just get them under our umbrella before someone else offers them a bigger stack of cash?
Yeah, well, we know that the competitive scape has kind of, it's changed now, right? And I think now that the fact that, obviously there's still studios that are ripe for acquisition. We talked about WB, we talked about other, publishers, and even have a bunch of studios under them. And I think that the thing about it right now is just that there is another bag to chase. So that drives the price up, right? And in Microsoft's case, I'm not sure, Maddie, because it's like lately I'm getting signs that they want to kind of like look at Crystal Dynamics situation, right? And we talked about that, right? Where it's like, okay, Square didn't really have anything to do with them after Avengers. They're Western, they're kind of available, so to speak. We already know our boy from what's homie from the Initiative. I forget his name right now. Off top. Gallagher, right? And he's got the past relationships and so on and so forth. What I'm seeing from Microsoft is kind of, we're going to work with you. We'll see how things go. Mm-hmm. And then if the relationship goes well with a Perfect Dark, where we know Crystal Dynamics is like co-developing or whatever, then okay, maybe we could talk about acquisition down in the future. Then we're seeing certain things with, I believe IO and there's Avalanche. There's certain things. That's the vibe I'm getting. Like Microsoft right now, the vibe I'm getting from them is either that type of relationship or like we talked about, well, you're starting to decline a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then we'll swoop in. And we talked about Bethesda, right? They were kind of doing a lot of the free-to-play stuff. And, they were kind of going outside their single-player bag. And let's be real, so 76 didn't really work out. And they had a couple of flops. And then the Wolfenstein co-op game. So Microsoft, to me, as much as they have the money to do what they want, they're still being, very smart and slow with just gobbling up. So I don't know just yet. But in relation to your overall question, with Tencent involvement, it drives the price up. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Microsoft wants to necessarily overpay unless it makes absolute sense for me. That's the vibe I get. I could be wrong, but that's the vibe I get.
Colin, how about yourself? Yeah, how do you view the merger acquisition process moving forward with our conversation about Tencent and Intel?
Yeah, it's going to be, I think 2022 is going to be nuts. I think a lot of things are going to happen this year that people might not want to happen. I think companies will start rolling into each other like snowballs. And my hope is that there are smart enough people. We're only seeing it really with Embracer, which I think is way too big at this point. But hopefully some smart people in the industry are starting to get together with each other and saying, we need to make a fund and we need to create new publishers. We need new entities. I think Europe is a really great place for this. You see this with not only Embracer, but also Focus Home, or it's like Focus Entertainment or whatever. Mm-hmm. Now they're starting to try to create something, and it's a mirror image of what's going on in China. And so I would expect those acquisitions to continue to happen. I think it's becoming fascinating to figure out who they're even going to go after at this point, because there's not that many left. I think, Insomniac was taken off the board a few years ago. They would have been a big acquisition, I think, for one of these. Remedy is the only other one I can think of, but they are working with like 5 different publishers now. I think that would be way too complicated to even buy them now. Yeah. You have IO Interactive, maybe they would be available, but I'm rooting for as many studios as possible to just remain on their own. And then we'll see, even we haven't talked about everyone, but even Bungie and others have Chinese ownership. So
shout out to NetEase.
Now NetEase is not as sinister, seemingly, right? MiHoYo is not as sinister as it seems, but we don't know. I mean, that's why I want to have that conversation with the guy from Rand next month, because he's going to know. Yeah. And I think that I'll be able to really pick the brains of like, what is the intent? Is this theory of my Belt and Road thing? Is this true? Are they just waiting in these various locations? Yeah, because it's just like, oh yeah, we got money. I mean, that's what they're doing in politics. That's what they're doing all over the world with everything. I mean, who was talking to the Taliban about 1 second after we left? Afghanistan, Chinese. So just something to keep an eye on. But I think it's a fun, like, philosophical and academic exercise to just think about how this might go. And I don't think people are going to like it. So we're gonna see what happens. I think 2022 is if you read about economics, and I do, not that I know an incredible amount, it's just like mergers and acquisitions are happening everywhere, and games are just not going to be immune to it. It's just too much money. The economy's too hot right now. There's a lot. Everyone has money to spend. I was reading, in fact, that even American people, $2.4 trillion they put away during the pandemic. So if you can imagine that people, just the average per capita person, saved a little bit of money, imagine what the companies that have been preying on you during the entire point COVID are going to, how much money they might have, and how much that will be burning a hole in their pocket. So yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. But this is a great conversation, gentlemen. Unless I don't want to cut anyone off. If there are any additional thoughts either you two have?
No, I'm good for now. That was good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
This discussion.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is great. I think this is an important one. And I think a good 2-episode tone setter for just separately, I want to say for DDU. Cog, you and I really had some talks, and we were like, we want to start pushing the right buttons for this show moving forward. And Colin, as you know, we're lining up an interview right now for a certain individual. Cog, I'll tell you after. And we got a lot of cool stuff lined up. So we hope you enjoyed this conversation. Much more like this on the way. So keep it posted here. Largest gaming Patreon on the internet. Colin, again, thank you for everything.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
Cog, thank you. And to the audience, thank you. We'll catch all of you next time with episode 51 of DDU. Until then, take all right care of yourselves. We'll see you then, all right? Peace out.
Peace.
Defining Duke, an Xbox podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from the United States of America. The show is conceived by Matthew Mr. Matty Plays Schroeder and me, Colin Moriarty, and is written and produced by Matthew Schroeder. Matty's co-host is Barry Lord Cognito Eversley. Defining Duke's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Defining Duke, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level on Patreon, and we're thankful for your kindness and generosity.